This is BBC Two in the North, and now a change to the published programme. After last night's attack by Manchester United's Eric Cantona on a Crystal Palace fan, Close Up North asks, where now, Cantona?
Eric Cantona, the darling of Manchester United, captain of France, the player's own player of the year, tonight stands accused of placing a stain on the game of football. As millions of shocked television viewers saw last night, Cantona launched a violent physical attack on a supporter as he left the playing field, having been sent off for kicking an opponent in the Premiership match at Crystal Palace. In this Close Up North special, we'll examine what happened last night and ask, what now for Cantona? What now for the game that he loves, but which this evening he's been charged with bringing into disrepute?
If Eric Cantona's athletic attack had happened in the street, he would probably be in custody now. But this wasn't a barroom brawl. It was a sports field, with 18,000 witnesses in the stands and millions more watching television. The role model to a generation of children had betrayed his sport and the inherent code of self-discipline and self-control. Cantona, the Frenchman, is one of English football's most successful players, but as an ambassador for the game, he has an undiplomatic record. After this incident while playing for Nîmes, he told the disciplinary committee which banned him for 3 games that they were a bunch of idiots. In Turkey, he clashed with police after he was sent off in the European Cup game in 1993. He also accused the referee of taking a bribe. He was arrested by security guards at the World Cup after a row with an official. And he's been banned for a total of 8 games in a career that lunges erratically from talent to temper. It's not the volatility of a single player which most worries the football authorities. It's the fact that hooliganism, driven from the grounds in the early 80s, has re-emerged on the other side of the touchline.
What happened last night was a stain on our game. If any offence is proved, the player concerned is bound to face a severe punishment. We will have ensured all the circumstances leading up to the incident get the fullest and fairest consideration. Over the past 18 hours, we've been talking to the police, the match officials at Selhurst Park, and representatives of Manchester United and Crystal Palace. All are treating the matter with extreme seriousness. We're confident that Manchester United will meet their responsibilities, not just to their own club, but to the widest interests of the game. The Football Association believes last night's incident was unprecedented. It brought shame on those involved, and worst of all, on the game itself.
Cantona, the flawed genius, is the Red Devil superstar who inspired the Old Trafford team to win a 1993 Premiership title and the League and Cup double last year. At the club, which Cantona undoubtedly loves with a passion, they were less inclined than the FA to make quick judgments.
We will look at the thing fully, and Manchester United will want to do whatever is appropriate in the circumstances. However, as you'll appreciate, there's already been a number of things said, and there are potential charges of a criminal nature and through the FA, and clearly we would not wish to do anything which is prejudicial at this stage.
As Cantona left his home in Worsley this morning, ignoring journalists' questions, he was the talk of the playing fields in Manchester. Cantona may be paid £10,000 a week, but at the Trinity High School, he's not earned the respect of his fans.
He's upset everyone, he's upset all his fans, his manager, his team, everyone, and I don't think he should have done it.
Cantona recognises the depth of his character, but shrugs off his unpredictability by blaming his artistic nature.
Tu apportes du bonheur aux gens par cette spontanéité, par cette instinctivité. Forcément, il y aura des taches d'ombre, taches noires.
The black stain of last night will stick to Eric Cantona for a long time. As the father of a young son, Cantona will realise how children copy the actions of their idols. Football this evening finds itself ashamed of a player who had in his grasp the intelligence and imagination of greatness. Whether the game's supporters can forgive him depends now as much on United's attitude to a punishment as Cantona's sense of atonement.
Well, in the space of a few torrid seconds, the career of English football's most unpredictable player reached a new peak of controversy. In the next half hour, I'll be discussing the implications of Cantona's show of force with my studio guests. David Meek of the Manchester Evening News, Raymond Farrell of the British Association of Sport and Law, members of the Football Supporters Association, Johnny FLACKS, who supports Manchester United, and Tim CRABBE, who is a Crystal Palace fan. Both were at last night's match. And Willie Morgan, the former Manchester United and Scotland striker. We'll also be joined by French journalist GERARD HERENS and more supporters of Manchester United who can scarcely have expected to see anything like last night's astonishing events. But there's a heavy responsibility now on the directors of Manchester United who are meeting this evening. Our reporter Peter Stevenson is at Old Trafford.
Well, Charlie, I can tell you it's a bitterly cold night here outside Old Trafford, but it hasn't stopped several supporters, as you can probably see behind me, coming down to see if they can glean any bit of information about Eric Cantona's future. That meeting that you referred to, initially we thought that was to have been held here with about 4 or 5 senior directors, but in the last couple of hours we've been informed that that meeting has been switched to a secret location, so all we can do here is wait and see what information United decide to give us later on.
I know you've spent quite a bit of time down at Old Trafford today. Has there been much hustle and bustle of activity at the stadium?
Plenty of media here, as you can expect, but also I think it's fair to say a lot of fans coming down to still to buy their Cantona shirts, still to put their Cantona posters in the back of their cars. A healthy business being done at the souvenir shop, and I think it has to be said that the consensus among the fans is that Eric Cantona perhaps having a bit of a raw deal. They feel that there was intense provocation there last night, and that possibly the Frenchman is being made a scapegoat for the problems at Crystal Palace last night.
Peter, thank you. We'll be back with you and those frozen supporters before the end of the programme. Well, gentlemen, everything suddenly went wrong in those few crazy seconds last night. Now, we have with us 3 people who were actually at the game. David Meek, you've been covering Manchester United since 1958. What did you make of those moments of madness?
Well, I was quite astonished, as everybody else in the ground was. And it's very difficult, in fact, it's impossible to defend what Eric did. I mean, it was a bizarre kind of attack to sort of go on the kung fu and what have you, but the only thing one can say in defence of that is that he is a footballer, and he certainly used his feet to land himself in this drama.
Was there any hint before then that he was getting so wound up that something like this might happen?
Well, don't just sound too clever, but I could see it coming, because 3 different players in the Palace team had given him a good crack. There was one particular tackle from behind which sort of went right down the back of his leg. He had to have treatment and he resumed limping, and I would have thought in the present climate that was at least a bookable offence, if not a little bit more. So he was getting a little bit agitated because I think he felt that he was being unduly knocked around without getting much protection from the referee.
Tim CRABBE, as a Crystal Palace supporter, is that how you see it? Did you think that your players were roughing him up a bit?
I don't think it was anything really more than the ordinary attempts to pick on the most talented player perhaps in the side. I think that obviously there was very close attention being paid to Eric Cantona. He's a star player, and sure, there were 1 or 2 challenges going in that might have been a little bit over the mark. Basically, that's the referee's responsibility to make an interpretation of that. If he gives a free kick or decides to caution people, that's his business, and professionals have to accept the will of the referee. In this case, Eric Cantona decided to take the game or the problem into his own hands. It seemed to attempt to strike Richard Shaw shortly before he lashed out with his foot at him.
That was a Crystal Palace player who was
That's
involved.
correct, yeah. The ball came back and he sort of did lash out a boot when he had no chance really of getting the ball. That was 2 incidents really, and the referee had no option but to send the player off.
Now maybe that will have wound up the home supporters. Johnny FLACKS, did you feel that there was a large degree of provocation against Eric Cantona?
I thought that the tackles that he was being subjected to, and the one that David referred to, was in the first couple of minutes, and the player should have been cautioned, and especially under the new so-called guidelines. The thing about it though, it's not just the one game. Manchester United supporters and players, the animosity that's been shown towards them since we won the championship in 1993, it's the first time for 26 years, has been incredible. And I think with Eric Cantona, he probably, after doing what he did, and I don't defend what he did in terms of being sent off, that I think that he'd reached the end of his tether, if you like. and walking a lot down the touchline. Unfortunately, what happened and shouldn't have happened, and I would certainly not condone anything that he did. But I just think it's been a symptom of something that's been brewing for months, if not years.
You're saying that there is so much hatred towards Cantona in particular amongst opposing fans that maybe they wanted to see this kind of scenario.
Well, quite honestly, I think that there is an unfortunate streak in English football and in British way of life that we build up stars to let them down, and this is the way they do it. I think there will be a lot of people who, if this is Eric Cantona's last game in English football, they'll be delighted to see that. But I think that English football will be the less for his if he doesn't play again.
Willie Morgan, what about the pressures that star players are under? You knew all about that in your days at Old Trafford, particularly a Manchester United player playing away.
There is pressure. Obviously there's pressure. But, you know, you're talking about tackles. I saw the highlights of the game, and I mean, if he gets wound up with the tackles that he's getting put in at the moment, God knows what it would have been like playing against Tommy Smith and Norman Hunter and people like that. I mean, the tackles they're innocuous at the moment. They really are. I don't think it's got. You know what we're really here to talk about tonight is not what he's sending off, because that's irrelevant. You get sent off, you'll get punished, as any player would. It's what he did afterwards. And I mean, I know everyone said the same. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've been sent off a few times in my career and had to walk down the touchline and get confused.
You didn't go in for the kung fu on the way off?
No, not really. It's not. I just thought it was crazy. I've never seen. I think he's going to be severely punished by both Manchester United and the league. I think he's going to be in for a
Gentlemen,
really
thank
hard
you.
time.
Thank you for the moment. Well, as Willie was suggesting there, for Eric Cantona's playing colleagues, the focus of attention comes for all the wrong reasons. The Players' Union is the Professional Footballers Association, and our reporter Paul Grant asked their chairman Pat Nevin, the Tranmere and Scotland winger, what was his reaction?
Do the PFA agree that he's brought the game into disrepute?
I think it's hard to imagine a more serious misdemeanour, really. But as you say, he actually was pretty badly provoked. But you can understand that the FA want to take it very seriously, and probably Manchester United would want to take it very seriously. And in that light, at the PFA, we understand that, but we are in contact with Eric, and you know, hopefully, quite soon, Eric can come up with an apology, and we can maybe get to the root of what were the causes.
To what extent are players provoked by fans during games?
It's actually part and parcel of the game. You need to be able to handle it. You have to have the type of temperament and the type of character to be able to handle it. And you know, even though it's part of football, or maybe part of society's problems more than anything else, players all accept it's an unwritten law. It's probably a written law as well, that you don't react violently.
Well, what does happen to Eric Cantona now? All sorts of people are mulling over that, and we'll try and assist their deliberations along the way. Raymond Farrell, Chief Executive of the British Association of Sport and Law. Those two subjects seem to be colliding an awful lot these days. What do you think Eric Cantona has to feel from the force of the law now?
Well, I think it must first be pointed out that the police investigation, which is ongoing, must be completed. A report will then be sent, I would have thought, to the Crown Prosecution Service, which then has a discretion as to whether or not to institute criminal proceedings against Mr. Cantona.
Can I just ask you that, are you surprised that he hasn't been charged with something already?
Oh, not at all, no, because it would be quite improper for any criminal process to be decided so quickly. I think that this is probably going to take several weeks, if not longer, for the process to be completed. All the investigations which the police force are conducting must be completed. The reports must then be forwarded to the Crown Prosecution Service.
On the face of it, it's a fairly cut and dried case, isn't it, with that video evidence? I mean, how will that affect deliberations? How will that affect any fair trial if it came to a trial?
It's an interesting point, this, because increasingly in the United States of America, complaints are being made that people are being tried in advance by television, and that sort of criticism is creeping into our system. I think it is a worrying development, but I don't think that there would be any problem in the use of video evidence in any possible criminal proceedings, either in this case or any other. But there is just one point I would like to raise, Charles, and it's this, that if the law is being considered in this context, which is quite properly it is, then I think it must be considered in its entirety. It's well established, of course, that the law of the land does not stop at the touchline, neither does it stop at the entrance to the stadium. In other words, the spectators themselves are subject, of course, to the law of the land. Now, I'm not in any way seeking to exonerate what Mr. Cantona did, or even commenting on it, quite frankly, but it was quite obvious that when he was walking from the pitch that there was a degree of provocation. In the Times newspaper this morning, there was a quotation from a Crystal Palace fan of some 30 years standing, apparently highly respectable gentleman, who said that he had never seen such intense provocation in 30 years. So I'm not saying that excuses it, what I'm saying is...
Could they be the subject of criminal action?
No, certainly, because the criminal law applies to the spectators as well as to the players.
Let me just bring in Tim CRABBE, the FMA. I mean, as a Crystal Palace supporter and a high-ranking official with the FSA, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that we've got to get this into perspective. As Willie said before, he's experienced being sent off, having to walk down and go down a tunnel after having been sent off, and been used to the jeers and from the crowd and the sort of the barracking that might go on. Now, that's not to suggest that that's never been the case before. That's always been the case. That happens in high-profile matches. When a player gets sent off, the crowd gets excited, and if the crowd wasn't able to be excited when events like that happen, then people wouldn't turn up to football matches, because people turn up to football matches to be involved in the spectacle. And that's what happened last night. If there are people that have been using foul or abusive language, then there are facilities within the stadium's guidelines, there are stewards, there are police officers that must take responsibility for that. It's not up to the likes of Eric Cantona to take that into his own hand. He's paid a great deal of money to actually behave in a responsible fashion.
Well, let's get back to Eric Cantona and David Meek. What sort of football sanctions do you think might be applied to a case like this, which is surely without precedent?
Yes, it is without precedent, particularly the nature of the assault, although it's not the first time, I don't think, that a player has landed one on a spectator. I had a call tonight from Harry Gregg, who you perhaps remember was the goalkeeper before and after Munich, and he picked up on this, is this unprecedented or not, and he reminded me that twice he'd been involved in punching a spectator. The first time somebody taunted him about Munich, and he said he vaulted over the wall and he chased the spectator up through the terracing, and he said I would have killed him if I could have caught him. But well, maybe it's just as well, but otherwise he would be in the dock as well. And there was another incident at Luton, where the Bedfordshire police were going to charge him, and then for some reason dropped charges. And I wonder whether one of the reasons that we didn't sort of hear quite so much about it, is that the media, and especially television coverage in those days, was not as intense. I mean, this is like an O.J. Simpson
yes,
trial
I take the
it?
point, but I mean, the offence is there for all to see. Clearly, the FA are preparing to throw the book at him, judging by Graham Kelly's reactions today. So, what could that consist of? I mean, do you have any idea how many games he might be banned for example?
People are talking about a life ban, particularly some of the tabloid newspapers. But I think they're getting carried away. I mean, you've got to sort of use a little bit of a comparison here. Paul Davis, did he not get 3 months for breaking a player's jaw? Now, I think we're in this kind of bracket. And I would think that sort of suspension, plus a fine, is the order of things.
Which would basically rule him out for the rest of the season,
yeah,
more or less. Willie Morgan, how do you see it? What do you think?
Well, I don't agree with David. You know, what you do on the pitch, and there's been lots of occasions where people have hit other people on the pitch. It's part of the game, because you do get provocation on the pitch, and it's part of the game. And you, as you say with the Arsenal player, you got fine suspended, and that's great. Attacking a spectator in the way that he did has got nothing to do with what happens on the pitch, and I don't think that a 3 months ban and a fine would be relevant in this case. I mean, I think it's way beyond the bounds of what a footballer should be doing.
So you think that more than 3 months? I mean, would you be one of those who would like to see him banned sine die?
Well, I wouldn't like to see anyone banned sine die, but I honestly think that he's in serious jeopardy of that happening.
Okay, let's get the French perspective on this now from GERARD, who is a French journalist working with the BBC French service in London. GERARD, obviously the news of all this will I'm sure have been followed eagerly in France. What's been the reaction there?
Well, judging by the number of phone calls we received from our colleagues in Paris and so on, it has enormous impact. He is the captain of the national side, and the president of the French Football Federation, M. Simonet, reacted quite rapidly, saying that in his mind, in his view, it was very unlikely that Eric Cantona was going to play for France again in the near future, and certainly not as a captain.
That is obviously that would be a big problem for him, loss of status and everything else.
Obviously. Apart from that, I wish to say as well that French people had a deep sense of pride in the achievements of Eric Cantona in this country. No other French footballer had ever done so well in the English league, which is considered, rightly so, in France as arguably the best in the world. Now, all this feeling of pride has been overshadowed by a sense of gloom and shame, I have to say.
To some extent, it seemed as if, despite his brushes with referees here, Eric has rehabilitated since he came to England from France. This kind of problem we thought had put behind him. Is there now a feeling in France that he's gone back to his bad old ways? And
Well,
what could be the outcome, do you think?
I'm not sure about that, but there was a kind of joke going among French journalists saying that Eric Cantona will be okay so long as he doesn't speak English. The moment he begins to understand English and express his views in English, he'll be in trouble.
Well, maybe his language curve is rising fast. Gerard, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. David Meek, just to go back to what Willie Morgan was saying before when he was talking about a fairly lengthy sentence. Remembering that when Eric Cantona really fell foul of the French authorities, he walked out of France. Do you think that he may decide that he'll leave England now?
I think if he feels that Manchester United are going to wash their hands of him, I don't think he will stay around for 10 minutes. I think he will decide it's time to move. I think Eric flourishes when he's somewhere where he's respected and loved, and I mean that's his personality needs that kind of protection. If that goes, and let's face it, Alex Ferguson has handled him brilliantly. He's taken him to the best football of his career, as Gerard was saying. He's brought him more success. He's introduced him to the right stage for his talents. Now, if Eric was to feel that prop was to be taken away from him, I think he would go. I think that's probably why he's never bought a big house in this country. It'd be easy for him just to
So the
walk
onus
away.
is clearly on Manchester United's directors this evening. Johnny Flacks is a United supporter. What sort of lead do you want to see them taking?
It's very difficult to say. I hope for Eric Cantona's sake that he doesn't play this Saturday. Not for anything else, other than the fact that if he does play, he'll be under the microscope. But coming back to something about the Football Association, this has been manna from heaven for them. We've seen over the last few months the way that they've acted in certain situations regarding players receiving money, etc., managers and all the rest of it. This has just been manna from heaven for them. As far as they can see, it seems to be a black and white case. It's in front of them, it's on television, they'll take their actions on that.
Well, they have been putting pressure on United today to take some action in advance of their meeting. David Meek, do you think that's unfair pressure on the club?
I do. I think I agree with John. I think they've rushed at this. I think they've had so many difficult problems this season with the bungs and the sleaze and managers, distinguished managers being asked questions about financial irregularities, and they've been powerless, and everybody's criticising them for sort of muddling along and not being in control. Now suddenly, as John says, they have a black and white case which everybody can understand, which everybody has seen, and they're going to come down heavily in order to sort of just create the impression that they are in control of football in this country. And I think Eric might have to pay the price for the sins of a lot of other people.
Okay, let's go back to Old Trafford now and see how Peter Stevenson's getting on with the supporters. What's the view down there, Peter?
Well, Charlie, the temperature's tumbling, but the crowds, if anything, are increasing. Let's just have a quick word about how they see the current situation. I gather you have a special reason to like Eric Cantona. Tell me why.
Well, one of the many reasons is obviously just because he's a great player, but I mean, I've liked him that much that on Monday my daughter was born, Laura Jane, and her middle name is Cantona, Laura Jane Cantona Boyle. And even now, I mean, I've got no regrets about calling her that, you know. Obviously he's overreacted, but I mean, he's human, isn't he? Or is he?
I gather you feel he's been made a scapegoat. Tell me why.
Well, I think it's a bit of a witch hunt with the ace that the FA have acted with this, and there's other more important issues, i.e. Burson with his drugs, Graham with his bungs, that seem to have been put on the back boiler and they've been there for months.
I know the FA today called it a stain on the game. How do you react to that description?
Well, what I'm worried about is that the FA are going to lump on Cantona all the problems that they've been having with running the game over the last few years. I think the Tottenham case and so on, they'll be looking to reassert their authority, and I'm concerned that they don't throw the book at Cantona over this.
Provocation in the crowd, I know that's a point that you feel strongly about. Tell me why.
Well, wherever Eric Cantona goes is always at the receiving end of stick from the crowd. and I'm sure last night was no different. And at the end of the day, we're all only human, and if you push and push and push somebody, eventually they're going to break, and I think that's what happened last night to Eric Cantona.
Can I just ask you what you think this means in footballing terms? Cantona possibly out now for several weeks, possibly the whole season?
I do feel, Peter, it's going to take a lot of grit and determination for the team to get back together, but I'm sure with the likes of characters like Paul Ince, Mark Hughes, Gary Pallister, Steve Bruce, but just to name a few, we can get back, we can go on and win the league, we can win the FA Cup, we can do the double and make Eric Cantona come out for the Charity Shield at the start of next season, perhaps just a slightly more refined character.
So there you are, Charlie. I think it's fair to say fairly solid support here for Eric Cantona, and the current whisper is that it could be a 25-game ban, which of course will mean him missing the rest of the season. Now back to you in the studio.
Peter, thank you. Let's go straight to Willie Morgan. What about the image which Eric Cantona has presented of the professional game over the last 24 hours and all those little kids who idolise him?
Well, I tend to think that's blown up, in all honesty, Charles. You know, the incidents that we spoke about earlier that's been going on in football, talk about bungs and talk about people taking money to lose games and all sorts of things. I mean, the image of football has never been brilliant because players do react on the pitch. And the language on the pitch and the tackles and the fighting on the pitch, it's never been a great role model for kids. It never has been. And I don't think that's the major point.
But isn't this the way that the game's authorities are trying to present it now, as a sanitised game, which maybe...
The game will never change. The game will never ever change. I think the biggest problem that Eric Cantona's got, that he brought the name of Manchester United into disrepute.
Johnny, Flack, let's bring you in there. The name of Manchester United in disrepute, thanks to Mr. Cantona?
Obviously, it's taken a battering of the last 24 hours, but I think we've got to look at it again in perspective. You know, what happened was at a football match. We all sat here, football is important to us. There were people who were killed last night in the snow. I mean, let's get it in perspective. You know, he did something which was wrong, and he will pay the penalty. Hopefully, as a Manchester United supporter, he's given me and many Manchester United supporters many hours of entertainment that we've not had since a player like George Best. And hopefully we'll get that opportunity again, but I doubt it.
David Meek, I wonder if last night's game would turn out to be a pivotal point in the race for the League Championship this year. How much advantage does the suspension of Cantona give to Blackburn Rovers?
Well, it certainly doesn't help Manchester United's cause. I mean, they've got a few problems at the moment. Mark Hughes is injured, Andy Cole is cup-tied, and if Eric Cantona misses Saturday's game, which I expect him to, because I don't see how the club could possibly play him, I think they'll suspend him pending the outcome of the inquiries. They've not got a strike force to begin with, so that's the cup that they've got problems. But sometimes in adversity, you know, teams can pull together and find the resources, the mental concentration to do it. So it'll be a chance for the young players to come in, and they've not done badly when they've been introduced this season. So yeah, problems, but not insurmountable.
Ray Farrell, very briefly, if you would, do you think this is just one more example of the way sport is falling foul of the law these days?
Well, sadly, it is obviously another example, but I think, again, we must keep these matters in perspective. There are so many games played in so many different ball games, not only soccer, and I think perspective must be maintained at all times. This is very much a one-off occasion, and I hope that it is quickly forgotten.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. I rather doubt if it will be quickly forgotten, but we'll see. Gentlemen all, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Well, the debate will continue now with a phone-in on GMR. That's a local radio in the Manchester area. If you would like to take part in that, well, ring in on 0161 228 2255. Ring now, they'd like to hear from you. But from all of us here in the studio, a very good evening.